This year in Supercross has been the most dysfunctional, unpleasant, and just depressing experience I have dealt with so far since being a fan of this sport. And I am going to talk about why it's not just the recent drama with Ricky. That was one of a couple things that has happened this year. And I just got to be honest, I am definitely disillusioned. I was watching Saturday's race, and honestly, a quarter of the way through it, I just stopped watching. I just realized I didn't care about it. I need a break. I'm going to talk about why. I would imagine many of the things that I'm going to talk about you're already aware of, and I would even guess that many of you watching are feeling the same. There's two reasons why I watch a sport and am a fan of a sport and participate. One is the action, the excitement, the drama, the sport itself, and the other is the kind of ethos, the culture of the sport. Does it inspire me? Does it motivate me? Is it a group in a sort of a value system that aligns with mine? One of the reasons that a lot of mainstream sports I don't really like is I don't really like the value of the sport. I oftentimes don't like the behavior in it. And that's why I really only like motocross and cycling. And motocross is a great example of a sport that has and still is absolutely what I'm going to be talking about is a very small number of very powerful people. The overwhelming majority of the sport is still that same blue collar, family focused kind of ethos. And that's what I like about the sport. That's what has really kind of drawn me in. And one of the reasons that I find it so appealing and inspiring is that kind of tough, gritty, but ultimately family focused kind of mentality. And I would imagine many of you watching feel the same way. But unfortunately, there is a small number of very powerful people that over the past, I would say 4 or 5 months, has really kind of rocked my passion for at least watching it. I just need a break, and I am going to talk about where and why it happened. And it's probably not going to be a surprise, the 3 things that I'm going to talk about. So I would say the first thing that really caused a little bit of this confusion is the Lucas Mirtl situation. Now, I have looked into this over and over again, and I have been left with the sense of I don't know how you don't look at this situation and have serious questions and skepticism. And I'm going to talk about some of it. And ultimately, the sort of situation is still unfolding, but I have looked into it, and there is a lot of weird, sketchy questions that have yet to be answered. A brief synopsis is Lucas Mirtl, one of the most influential and successful agents in the sport, was accused of fraud and theft from the 2 Lawrence brothers, of which he was their agent. And ultimately, when news broke, it was a complete just out of nowhere. He found out, like we did, on I forget who broke the news. It was Vital, or it was one of the moto outlets, but he was being accused of fraud. He was fired from the agency that he worked for, sort of the larger talent agency, and obviously the Lawrence brothers. Now, at first, this was, wow, a greedy agent ended up dipping into the till. It's not the first time it happened, and it probably won't be the last time. But honestly, as someone that I feel like one of my skills is being impartial and unbiased. I feel like I'm pretty good at looking at a situation and allowing the facts to dictate my opinion. I have been critical of some of what the Lawrence brothers have done, and ironically, Lucas Mirtl, because he directed some of it. And honestly, as of now, from looking into it, and especially with Cooksey as one of the most notable people, he had an interview with Lucas himself and has talked about a lot of this. There's just a lot of weird sketchiness going on. Probably first and foremost, the suggestion that ultimately Lucas Mirtl was pilfering funds from the Lawrence camp, which just, if we take at a common sense level, okay, Lucas Mirtl, one of the most business savvy and intelligent agents in the sport, is going to decide to steal from the literal cash cow, his most lucrative client. I would assume if it's not his most lucrative, it's one of his most lucrative. He is going to decide to potentially risk that relationship, that revenue stream by stealing some money. So it's kind of strange. Hey, people do strange stuff, but it gets weirder. Among the charges that are levied against Lucas, they gave an example of a list of things that they are saying that Lucas was taking funds from the Lawrence camp and using that money to pay for. Now, what's again very strange, each one of these notations were accounted for and literally written out. Now, he had childcare, he had numerous expenses, but in this account that they are alleging he was using to pilfer the funds, he had written out the amount, the date, and what it was to be used for. And again, the common sense part of me looks at this and goes, he is either the dumbest and most incompetent white-collar criminal the world has ever seen, or there's something more to it. And again, not to constantly be sort of referencing Cooksey, but he's really one of the few people that cover this stuff. He had Lucas on, and he talked about that when you're an agent, when you're moving around millions and even tens of millions of dollars, he's a big agent, you constantly have money coming in and coming out, and ultimately his accounts are his responsibility to kind of balance out at the end of whatever, every quarter, every month, every half a year, every year. He has a ton of clients, and there is money. No, there's not just money coming in, there's also money going out, which he talked about is one of the common misconceptions, is one of the components of an agent is investing in the rider. And so there's money moving around a lot. In this account, and the way he sort of notated it, was an indication that he was pretty much going about business as usual. He would balance the funds like balancing a checkbook at the end of a designated period. And this is pretty common practice in the process of being a sports agent. And when he says that, that makes sense to me. Like, okay, that makes sense. You're got money going in, coming out, you're making notations, and you're going to have to pay those deficits whenever the time comes. So that intuitively and just from a common sense standpoint makes sense. Well, okay, the strangeness gets even stranger. So obviously the Lawrence brothers fire Lucas Mirtl. This is where possibly the strangest component of the story gets. They keep Wasserman, I forgot the name. So Wasserman is the overall talent agency. So they keep Wasserman employed as the Lawrence brothers agents, and they actually elect to get Lucas's protege, the person that he literally taught and brought into the business, now as their main agent. Now this just, if you weren't already suspicious, and I don't know how you wouldn't be, this just takes it to another level. Let me ask you guys, if you were involved in some kind of business, whatever it is, and there was fraud and somebody stole from you, are you going to have anything to do with that person, that group of friends, that company? I know I certainly wouldn't. I would say I'm not interested in continuing the services with Wasserman, and I am absolutely not going to continue employing his protege, the dude that I'm accusing of stealing. This was the dude that he taught and sort of, showed the ropes. So now you're going to have him in charge of your money. This just doesn't make any sense. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And not to go on a long rant, but this was the first thing this year that just left me with this strange, uneasy feeling that this didn't look kosher. There was a big deal on the horizon for Lucas and Lawrence brothers. He claimed he had signed or was sort of influential in arranging the biggest contract in the history of the sport. Now that is pretty much kaputs. Also interesting timing. And it's also very coincidental that this is right after, not right after, but this is after the Lawrence brothers were getting a lot of bitterness and hate from the fans because some of the fan zone, and I actually did a video, the weird jerseys and the donuts and everything else. I don't know how you don't look at this situation the way he was just totally blindsided. The events are just undeniably awfully coincidental, the way that this all kind of lined up. And when you look at the details, man, I just don't know how you don't look at this and say, boy, this is pretty weird. There's a lot of, maybe he's just the dumbest in spite of him being this business person, this mover and shaker. Maybe he figured the best way to make some extra money was to steal from the cash cow. I mean, I'm pretty sure if he wanted to skim, there would be a much more intelligent way of doing it, in a way that would not include making notations about the actual money and what it was being used for. So this was the first thing that left me just, this doesn't look right. There is something going on. The second thing, and possibly the most significant, is safety. So the one race, a couple of races ago, I forget what race it was, there was 3 rider incidents with the tough block. RJ Hampshire had his bike glued to one of those round disc tough blocks. Literally took probably a minute with him and the track people to rip his bike off this idiotic track marker. And I'm just looking at this going, and surely this is a practical joke. This isn't an elite event generating millions of dollars, the most dangerous sport, or we'll say one of the most dangerous sports in the world, and you got these top athletes with track markers glued. I mean, we're talking the thing was glued to the bottom of his bike because it gets hot and it's soft plastic. And I was just dumbfounded. Well, it gets much worse. That same night, Hunter Lawrence was taken out by a tough block, but one of the worst crashes I've seen this year, and there's been a lot, Pierce Brown threw the whoops, hit the tough block. Fill in the blanks. What do you think happened? Exactly what you think happened is what happened. His bike came to a complete stop and got absolutely ragdolled again and again. And looking at this and going, how do the people involved not care about rider safety? We're not talking about broken wrists or, a sprained ankle or something. We're talking about life-changing, debilitating injuries that they are unwilling to do anything about. And the cherry on top is that was the race when Ken Roczen had the run-in with the lapper. And so I'm watching the race and I'm going, surely if there is a moment in time where the industry people, the ass kissers, are going to say something about the tough blocks, it's tonight. They didn't say one word about it. Instead, what everybody wants to focus on is the privateers and how dangerous they are and what a hazard they are on the track and what an unbelievable incident it was with Ken Roczen. I don't know what else to say. I've watched that thing over and over. It was a racing incident. If that lapper that got into it with Ken Roczen was on a factory team, nobody would have even said anything. That stuff happens every race, but if it's not one of those big name guys, they get absolutely lit up by the riders in the industry. I didn't understand what the big deal was, and I was astounded that instead of talking about the tough blocks that just saw 3 of your riders, 2 of which end their season because of it, instead of talking about that, you're going to pick on the privateer. I mean, you guys tell me, how many big crashes have you seen from privateers? I don't remember any. I mean, I'm not saying it's never existed. And that Ken Roczen thing, in my opinion, was just a racing incident. Privateers, overwhelmingly, based on what I see, behave themselves, conduct themselves in an appropriate and responsible way. And for specifically Ken Roczen's manager, and I like Ken Roczen. Ken Roczen didn't say any of this, but his wanker of a manager was talking about how dangerous the privateers were and how much of a risk it is. And I'm like, you're kidding me, right? That is what you want to talk about? That's the risk that this sport needs to focus on, not the freaking tough blocks that just saw Pierce Brown get just, I mean, if that tough block was not in the whoops, Pierce Brown would have escaped essentially unscathed. These tough blocks just stopped the riders dead. It just happened last night, the race that I didn't even want to watch. And we're talking about the freaking privateers and how, poorly they managed to behave themselves on the track. So this was the second thing where I'm like, I'm already feeling disillusioned and uninterested in the sport. And then ultimately, what everybody knows of, the Ricky Carmichael, Daniel Blair, one of the worst examples of slimy politics, of people that have a lot of power targeting Daniel Blair, literally ruining his dream. There's no other way to say it. Lee Diffey, the douchebag munchkin-looking Australian guy that has nothing to do with motocross or 2 wheels. Has he ever said anything insightful about the sport? And the answer is no, because he doesn't know anything about the sport, because he doesn't care. The only thing he does on the broadcast, and I know I did a video about this and everybody else is, but it's like, I just can't move on. I mean, I was watching the broadcast and I can't listen to those two morons after what happened in the way that they scapegoated Daniel Blair. And as you can imagine, all the media ass kissers are talking about how Daniel Blair quit and this and that. And I love the one in particular suggesting that Ricky Carmichael was just razzing Daniel Blair on that video. That was just like smack talk. You guys tell me, was that smack talk? I love smack talk. I mean, you guys have left some of the funniest comments making fun of me. I love that stuff. Daniel Blair also loves to talk crap. That had nothing to do with, fun banter and smack talk between two friends. A, they weren't friends. B, Ricky Carmichael interrupted Daniel Blair while he was trying to do a video. And it's just another example of, really, that's what you're going with. So you're saying to me, to all the fans, that what we just watched isn't the case. And it's just accumulated into this feeling of disillusionment. I need a break. I'm not going to watch the races for a couple of races. I still support the riders, the sport, the community. But man, this year has been weird. It has been just certainly the strangest in my memory. And typically this sport, it really prides itself on avoiding all of this slimy, sort of creepy stuff that is so commonplace elsewhere. But this year, it has just been depressing. And it's just hard for me to watch it and pretend like I care, because I don't. It's like there needs to be changes. The tough blocks, how are we still talking about this? The Ricky, and I know the Lucas Mirtl thing is kind of an anomaly, but it's just been a weird year. I'm still going to watch the races. I just need a break, a couple races. We'll see how it shakes out with Ricky and Lee Diffey. But it's just been a weird year. Again, I'm going to still tune in. I just need a break from it, because it has been the most unusual and dysfunctional experience I've sort of went through so far as a fan of the sport. The ongoing safety oversights, it couldn't be more clear that nobody in Feld and the organizers at Supercross gives a shit about rider safety. I mean, I don't know how it could not be more obvious. It's ruined my enthusiasm for the racing right now. It's not going to last. I'm going to tune back in. It was awesome to see, I didn't watch the race, but, I saw it on YouTube that Cooper Webb won. He's awesome. It's great to see. I need a break from the sport. The Ricky Carmichael thing, and obviously all the mouthpieces coming out and saying exactly what you would expect them to say, that Daniel Blair quit and it was nothing. It was just Ricky Carmichael's such a sweetheart. And hey, maybe Ricky Carmichael's a sweetheart 99% of the time, but it was pretty clear that he seriously mishandled that situation and needs to be held accountable. When somebody does something illegal or something unethical, you don't go, well, okay, he's a nice guy over here, so we're just going to forget it. No, it's like he conducted himself in a just egregiously unethical and scumbag way. He needs to be held accountable. I just don't want him in the booth. He ruined the dream of Daniel Blair. It's really obvious. It's just been a weird year. I want to hear what you guys think. Like I said, it's just, I'm a little jaded and disillusioned at this point. It's not going to last long. It's been a weird year. I want to hear what you guys think. And yeah, I was going to say, hope you enjoy the video, but there's nothing to enjoy about it. It sucks. This year has sucked. That's before we even get into Eli getting hurt. It's just, what a crappy year for Supercross.